You are tuned to another episode of A Meeting Over the Fence. I'm David Charles, and I'm with my co-producer, Helen Kane.
Hello.
We extend a warm welcome to you specifically, and to all others, whether you're traveling, working, or maybe just relaxing. In our meetings over the fence, figuratively speaking, we talk with people about any topic under the sun, and quite literally. That means anything from how to grow your own food in a neighbour's garden to how we are all going to fix this planet of ours. And I think, Helen, you think we start at the top, don't we?
Oh, definitely, yes.
Right. But seriously speaking, in this episode, we're meeting a very special lady indeed. We are delighted to introduce and extend a warm welcome to Charlet Crichton. Charlet, welcome.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Wonderful to have you here. Now, Charlet, you were in the prime of life, but found yourself on a path not of your choosing. Your life, including the lives of your immediate family, has now changed and far beyond recognition. As a working mum, physically active and working in your own business, running a sports and remedial massage clinic in Kent, it is fair to say you were enjoying life to the full. That was until, following the general advice sung out by the government, the media, and the NHS, and just like so many of us, you lined up for the first of 2 COVID inoculations. The second proved life-changing for you. Still coping with and managing those life changes, and with huge compassion and a heart of gold, you turned to help others similarly affected. Charlet, thank you so much for joining us today to share with us a little of your story. We're going to hear in a moment just how life has changed for you, and also the mission you have embarked upon to help others similarly affected.
So, Charlet, thank you for joining us firstly. Again, would you like to tell us a little bit about how your life was before you were affected in this way?
My life was actually very full. I was blessed because I had a job that I loved. I was very busy in my job, so I had a constant stream of clients wanting to book appointments, and I enjoyed my work very much. It was public facing, so I got to see people face to face and help them through their injuries. So I treated everyone from amateur runners right the way through to kind of semi-professional athletes, and just normal people with their aches and pains. And so it's an extremely rewarding job because I felt the satisfaction of being able to help people, which is what I've always liked to do. On top of that, I've been a volunteer for several causes. In the lockdown, I volunteered for a dog rehoming charity. I was already doing face-to-face rehoming before the lockdowns, but during the lockdowns we went via video call, and I'm pleased to say I rehomed a lot of puppies in that time. I've also worked with the homeless and also with refugees as well. So I've always enjoyed that type of thing. On top of that, my hobbies have always been fitness and travel. So I was widowed. My fiance died in 2004, and I was left on my own with 2 children. And I decided that I would try and see as much of the world as possible and live my life to the fullest. So I took my children around the world, and we travelled a lot. And I met my new partner, now of 14 years. So we've been together a while now. But, they were my passions, and I enjoyed travelling 3 or 4 times a year, working in a job that I loved, and being a family person, really.
Marvellous.
Marvellous. What was that job that you were doing?
My sports and remedial massage clinic, yeah.
That was the main occupation for you, but you're also a full-time mum, clearly, looking after two boys, I think, is it?
2 boys. They're now adults, so they're kind of left the nest now, but yes, previously.
Okay. But then we were all struck with this thing called COVID. and subsequent to it arriving on the shores of Kent and elsewhere, we were all prompted to take an inoculation. What was it that was at the forefront of your mind as the reason to take that inoculation when you did, Charlotte?
I think I realised that I had a lot of my clients were very wary of COVID, and some were vulnerable. So we were being told that it would reduce the possibility of transmission, weren't we? So that was one reason. The second reason, selfishly, I did want to travel again as soon as possible. I was missing traveling and wanted to get back to it as soon as I could. And I guess thirdly, as I said before, we were all being told it would reduce transmission, prevent hospitalisation. You were selfish if you didn't take it. There was a lot of messaging around that time that kind of made the decision for me.
Right, so that was the driver then, because being, as you said, customer facing, it was very important for you to have this, and quite genuinely felt that it was going to be safe and effective for you. But tell us what happened. You took this jab, and there was almost an immediate effect from the first jab, I think, and far more serious effect from the second. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so going back to my voluntary work, in January of 2021, my local Rotary Club was asking for volunteers for the vaccination centre. So being someone that loves volunteering and helping the community, I volunteered to marshal at my local vaccination centre. So I was working down there maybe 12 hours a week, helping people queue and making sure that they did go to the consent areas. And if they changed their mind, helping them out the exit, and things like that, really. So I had my first AstraZeneca jab in February at the vaccination centre at the end of my shift. And I didn't feel great, but I didn't feel too bad when I first had it. But as I went home, I started to feel very fluish, and then I had a temperature and a flu-like reaction for about 3 to 4 days. And I'd say it was quite severe. I had the raging temperature, the head pain, just like flu had come out of the blue. And I thought it was my immune system, which it was, making a response to the vaccine. And I was told that this is a good response. So, I kind of rode it out. And then I just became very chronically fatigued. So I had no amount of sleep I had made me feel refreshed. I felt very, very tired. Everything I did made me feel like I was walking through treacle. And then my periods went very erratic. So I went to see my GP. And, well, I didn't see my GP because we weren't allowed to, were we? I phoned my GP and they arranged some blood tests. And that showed that my hormones were all fine. I wasn't premenopausal like I thought I might be because of my age. But my thyroid levels were slightly subclinical, as they call it. So we presumed it was a thyroid issue, nothing from the vaccine, didn't even cross our minds, So I went and had the second vaccine, again, at the same place where I had been volunteering. By now, I was too tired to do much volunteering, so I cut right back on it. So I had the second jab, and immediately I felt a bit like I'd drunk too much coffee. So that feeling when you feel like you've maybe drunk a bit too many espressos and and you shouldn't have done. I felt a bit like that.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a bit of a funny taste in my mouth, and I kind of brushed it off, and we were allowed to leave early because there weren't that many people coming into the centre. So I went home. And the next week was very odd because instead of feeling chronically fatigued, I felt very hyperactive all the time. I had severe insomnia. I felt wired all the time. Felt a bit jittery, just not right. And then I think it was either day 8 or 9. I went to bed and I really just didn't feel great. I did manage to get off to sleep, but I kept waking up throughout the night with a burning pain in my hands and feet. And then when I eventually woke up the next morning, they were both numb, completely numb.
Mm.
And you know, sometimes you lay awkwardly and
Yeah.
you think, you know, I might have laid funny and something's happened to my hand. Well, it was quite clear as time went on, it wasn't that, because the numbness started to creep upwards and all my legs tingled. I started to get electric shocks throughout my body. And over the next few weeks, I became incontinent. I started to get very bad head pressure. And over 30 other symptoms. You know, it was it was gradual, but it was quite extreme, if that makes sense. It came on gradually. The symptoms came on one by one over the weeks. At one point, my foot went into complete spasm and I couldn't sort of unlock it from a certain position. So I couldn't walk properly. I walked with a limp and I was still trying to work at this point. And
well, we've heard and read, in fact, stories of people like yourself that have been affected in this way and other ways too. I mean, it sounds horrendous. But before this went too far, you must have been on the phone to your GP to say, "Hey, I'm experiencing some funny things here. What can you do to help me?" What was the response of your GP for that?
well, my GP was actually quite good, I must admit, but she put me through for some urgent referrals. So she urgently referred me to neurology and rheumatology at the same time. But once those referrals came through, they were for 3 months ahead. And that's a long time to wait when you're gradually going numb.
Yes.
Very long time to wait. Yes.
So not a great deal of help was coming from the NHS. But whilst all this was going on, Charlotte, you must at some point have become aware that you weren't the only one that was experiencing this kind of trauma to your body. How did you discover that other people were similarly affected?
Well, it was my mum, actually. So my mum, I got a phone call from my mum, and she said, "You'll never guess what, I've just been walking through the village and I bumped into an old friend, and her niece has got exactly the same symptoms as you. It's all after her vaccine, and she's been managing to get some treatment in a hospital around about an hour and a half away from me." So then I started looking for other people online, and I found a video from, I think it was May or June last year, and it was in America. There was Brianne Dresden, Steph DeGarre, Maddie DeGarre, Kirsty Dobbs, Candace, and they were all talking to Senator Ron Johnson at a round table, and they were going through their symptoms, each person, and I had all their symptoms. So I started to reach out and try and find whether they had any support groups or anything like that. And then that's when I started to join support groups and find a lot of other people just like me.
Right. Okay.
And what you've discovered since, that there are so many people just like you, Charlotte, aren't there? So many people.
Yeah, there are.
Now you've actually, which is typical of you because you're a volunteer by nature. You're always there to help somebody with an engaging smile, which you show us now, given the fact that even given the fact that you're struggling as you are with this effect from the inoculation, but you jumped in and you started to help people and had the idea to create your own group to support people. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, what happened was I ended up becoming a moderator on the worldwide group, And what I was seeing was a lot of people that were living in the UK that were vaccine injured were dealing with a special set of problems to do with access to healthcare by the NHS, which of course they don't have in other countries. So in America, obviously, they have an insurance system, which, provided you've got good insurance, means that, you know, if you don't get on with one doctor or they're not helping you, you can go and find a different one quite easily with your insurance money. Whereas in the UK, we kind of get assigned a consultant. We don't really get too much of a choice. And depending on what that doctor's personal views are about vaccine injury, shapes how you're treated, or it shouldn't do, but it appears to do. So, you know, so the morale amongst the vaccine injured in the UK was quite low. And I thought, right, what we need to do is get a group together and produce a survey of our symptoms. And then what we can do is, once we've got this survey, we can actually send this round to scientists, researchers, doctors, media, MPs, and try and get some help for us, you know, try and raise awareness and make people want to study and research us. Because, you know, the main thing that was bugging me, there were several things that were bugging me. One was the fact that I believed that if you had an adverse reaction to a medicine or a vaccine, that you would be researched. I thought that would be the natural thing that would happen because, well, you want to prevent it happening in other people, don't you? You want to be able to tweak that medication and you know, look at why certain people react that way and why others don't. So I naively believed that I would be researched, and I believe that others would be too, and we haven't been. So that was one of the reasons, and the second reason was the lack of support people were getting.
Yes, when you have seen doctors, Charlotte, have you been asked about pre-existing conditions?
Yes, they do. They do ask about your medical history when you go to see doctors, but I think that's just generally what happens when you go to see a new consultant anyway. I don't think they're necessarily asking from a kind of, can we connect this to how the vaccine is affecting different people? I think they're just wanting to see your kind of personal clinical picture, if that makes sense.
Yes, so you haven't been specifically asked whether you might have had something that made you affected?
I
No.
don't think they're delving too deeply into people's individual circumstances. Charlotte, you featured in a very important documentary film that was published just days ago, called Safe and Effective. And I think you also appeared in a previous documentary called
Letter to My MP.
Yeah. And made the point that that doctors seem to be almost totally uninterested in assisting people like yourself, which is extraordinary, because the whole country had this view that the NHS were there like angels waiting to help us through any condition that we might incur. But that's not what we've seen, is it, over the last 12 months or more? Have you seen any change in how the NHS has treated you and others over the last 12 months?
We're starting to find some consultants are more open to the idea and willing to try and treat us outside of the box. However, myself, I've spent £10,000 now, or nearly just about £10,000 on private appointments, tests, etc. Because the NHS doctors that I saw weren't very interested at all. So has it changed much in the last year? I'd say marginally. There are a handful of consultants out there that are trying their best to help people.
Well, that's extraordinary, isn't it? Because given what I've said a moment ago, that we all regarded the NHS as being the angels, if you like, waiting to be at our side to help us through any medical condition. But that's not what you've experienced, and it's not what we've seen from our own investigation. And the question has to be asked: Why is that? What has changed in our society to bring this situation about? Now, there are plenty of people that have theories about this, and our plan is to investigate some of those theories in an article that we'll write shortly on this particular subject. But it is a subject of extreme concern to people of the UK that are reliant upon the NHS, but it's also extremely important for those in the wider world, the 7 billion of us that occupy this planet right now. Serious questions need to be asked, don't they? And
they certainly do, yes. The reality that doctors and medical staff are not apparently interested in so many people who are so ill is horrendous. And it's really important to understand what's causing that lack of interest. And unfortunately, it's not just related to stick to doctors, is it? There seems to be a lack of compassion for people who are affected in this way.
Well, it's interesting. I think that the government couldn't have been more enthusiastic about people doing the right thing, protecting themselves, their family, their close ones, their loved ones, their neighbours and work colleagues by getting the jab. There couldn't have been more airtime, I think, given to that subject for several months, and of course supported by the media. And now there's no recognition of your situation. Now, we did see a video clip of Senator Ron Johnson in a meeting. I think it must have been Washington, meeting people like yourself. And it was interesting that at the end of that meeting, which was technically, as I understand it, a press conference or a press opportunity, there were a number of people there representing the press. But when it came to questions at the end of the session, there was no enthusiasm to ask those questions.
But all was their questions. And the questions that we did hear were quite irrelevant questions, such as it was nothing to do with what was actually being discussed. It was nothing to do with people's vaccine injuries. It was the lack of interest was astonishing.
Yeah, and that's what we've seen, the lack of interest. We've written to over 115 journalists, mainstream media journalists, and we didn't have one reply. We did actually, that is a lie. We did have a couple of replies, but when we had meetings with these people, they were told that they weren't allowed to cover our story. So
did they say any more about that lack of permission to cover your story?
Pardon?
Did they go into any detail about exactly why they weren't allowed to cover your story?
Not really, just that they've been told that it's not something they're going to cover. So
well, interesting, because that runs in parallel to the fact that, I mean, you'll know this, Charlotte, there are so many stories, and even today we hear more, to this very day, that people that are speaking out about this kind of situation, problems with the inoculation, the harm it's being causing, their posts on social media are being wiped. These people are being silenced. It's as if people are not allowed to know the truth about what's going on. Now, that has to be a red flag to anybody. This is all right. This is a free speech situation, of course, but because people have been affected in very serious ways, and let's be honest, a number of people have died as a result of being affected by the inoculation. And that's the worst of all outcomes, of course. But people should be allowed to speak about this and ask questions about it. But the opportunity for this, unfortunately, is being wiped. And we have to all ask why that is.
We do ask why that is, yes. It also it is a free speech issue. It's also a serious issue for informed consent for medical interventions. But because by suppressing the truth about what happens after this vaccine, people aren't actually able to give informed consent.
It's actually, stopping people from getting medical help as well, because doctors can only treat you based off of protocols they've been given, nice guidelines. And there are no nice guidelines for vaccine injury. There's no nice guidelines for us at all. So if there's no nice guidelines, the media aren't talking about it, the government aren't talking about it, the conclusion is it's not real. And
Exactly.
what we see in the group is that some unfortunate people are getting diagnosed with a condition called FND. I don't know if you know much about it.
No.
It's called functional neurological disorder.
Right.
And basically, the nice guidelines for that say that once you're diagnosed with it, no further tests are needed because it's a psychological condition. So basically, they describe it as your software and hardware not working properly. It's not hardware, it's software. That's what they tell you.
And there's even less they can do for it.
Yes, yeah, because you get referred to a neuropsychiatrist. So we've got one member who was her hands and feet were going blue due to lack of oxygen. She was having seizures in the consultant's office, and she was told it was psychological. Later that evening, I was talking to her husband, and he sent me a picture of her hands that were blue, and I said, "Get her to A&E now," where she was put straight on oxygen therapy.
How is she now?
She's still suffering from seizures, and she's still being told it's psychological.
Okay. Well, Charlotte, this is a huge subject, and it's not something that we could get anywhere near covering properly in any extent in a short time that we have with you. I mean, our plan is to, as I think I mentioned, to write an article about this, exploring some of the theories that are being bounded about at the moment. But we'd also like to come back to you and find out a little bit more about your progress, and particularly about the progress with the support group that you founded, which perhaps you could give us or remind us the name for.
So we're called UK CV Family. We've had to abbreviate all of that because otherwise social media removes us. So if we put the word vaccine in it, we'll get removed. So it's UK CV Family. We've got about 800 members. We've got a very active political campaign. So we've got our own policy documents and statements about what we would like to see change. As you know, Caroline Pover is an amazing author and writer, and she's put those together for us, and they are absolutely brilliant. So we've got all that put together. We're trying to start a charity, so we want to register as a charity soon, because we've got a GoFundMe at the moment. But obviously, if you're not registered as a charity, it's not as serious, is it? You can't do as much. So we've got our trustees that have volunteered in place, and we're just putting together documents for that. We have our YouTube channel. Unfortunately, some of our videos are getting removed. We talked about kindness last week, and that one has been called medical misinformation. So
what are we living in? Kindness is medical misinformation.
It's extraordinary.
Yes.
And let's be clear. So we've got a YouTube platform of the same name, UK CV Family, and also a Facebook group, UK CV Family.
Yeah.
And not forgetting, you've got the website as well. What's the address for the website, Charlotte?
Anyone can sign up to receive updates from our website, and it is www.ukcvfamily.org, and you can email us at inquiries@ukcvfamily.org.
Well, that's wonderful. What we'll do, Charlotte, is put all this information again in the show notes for this podcast, so people can get directly to those indicators. But in the coming week, perhaps we can come together again to gain some more information from you, which we'd like to incorporate within an article on the subject. And it won't be just one article on this subject, because this is huge for everybody. I mentioned earlier on that, I mean, you're an incredible person, frankly. I mean, given what you're suffering, and you're smiling to boot, that's amazing. But also what you're doing to help others. Now, from our point of view, you are one of life's shining lights in this world today.
Yeah.
And you're driving a light of compassion and love throughout the world. And from our point of view, we see that going beyond what what we're looking at today with regard to COVID, there seems to us to be a need for a sea change in how society operates across the whole world, how we see one another. And I think how we organize ourselves administratively. And I'm talking here about governments and big business, but that's a subject for another day. But can we thank you, Charlotte, for your time today in joining us and sharing with us your absorbing story, engaging story that it is.
Yes.
No, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure indeed. And all being well, if you're agreeable, we'd love to have you back to talk with us and give us an update and perhaps a different emphasis on what you're doing with the group and how other people are doing generally.
Wonderful.
Charlotte, thank you very much indeed. And we'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.